Have you ever heard of a man whose prayers were said to be more feared by a queen than an army of 10,000 men? This isn't a line from a fantasy novel. This was a real man, a Scot who stood against monarchs and challenged the most powerful institutions of his day. His name was John Knox, and his story is a whirlwind of rebellion, faith, and revolution that forever changed the face of Scotland and echoed across the world. Our story begins around 1514 in a small town called Haddington, just east of Edinburgh. Little is known for certain about Knox's early life, not even his exact birth year. He wasn't born into nobility. His father was a merchant, and his mother passed away when he was young. Like many bright boys of his time with modest means, the path forward was through the church. He studied at the University of St. Andrews and was eventually ordained as a Catholic priest. For a while, he lived a quiet life, serving as a notary and a tutor to the sons of local lairds or landowners. But the world around him was on the cusp of a seismic shift. Across Europe, the Protestant Reformation, sparked by Martin Luther in Germany, was sending shockwaves through the established Catholic Church. These new ideas began to filter into Scotland, carried by merchants, scholars, and smuggled books. They spoke of a direct relationship with God without the need for priests as intermediaries, and of the Bible as the ultimate authority, translated for everyone to read. One of the most powerful voices for this new faith in Scotland was a man named George Wishart. Knox, still a Catholic priest, heard Wishart preach and was completely captivated. This was a turning point. Knox was so moved by Wishart's message that he became his devoted follower, and, quite literally, his bodyguard. In those dangerous times, Knox would walk before Wishart carrying a large two-handed sword, ready to defend him. The sword was a symbol of the dangerous path he had chosen. Loyalty to the Reformation was seen as heresy, punishable by death, and that danger soon became a brutal reality. In 1546, the powerful Cardinal David Beaton, a staunch opponent of the Reformation, had George Wishart arrested. Wishart was tried for heresy and burned at the stake while the cardinal watched from his castle walls in St. Andrews. This brutal act didn't stamp out the new faith, it ignited a fire of vengeance. A few months later, a group of Protestant nobles stormed St. Andrews Castle, assassinated Cardinal Beaton, and took control of the fortress. And where was John Knox? He and his pupils sought refuge with the rebels inside the captured castle. It was here, within these cold stone walls, that Knox's life took another dramatic turn. The congregation in the castle chapel saw something in him: a fire, a clarity, a powerful voice. They publicly called on him to become their preacher. At first, Knox refused. The weight of the responsibility overwhelmed him, and he burst into tears and fled. But after days of private turmoil and prayer, he accepted the call. The quiet tutor was gone. The fiery reformer had been born. But his time in St. Andrews was short-lived. The Scottish regent, Mary of Guise, an ardent Catholic and mother to the young Mary, Queen of Scots, called on her French allies for help. In 1547, a French fleet besieged the castle. After a month, the Protestant rebels, including Knox, surrendered. They were promised their freedom, but the promise was broken. John Knox and the others were taken to France and sentenced to serve as galley slaves. Imagine the horror. For 19 months, Knox was chained to an oar on a French warship. This was a brutal, soul-crushing existence. He was surrounded by misery, sickness, and the constant crack of the whip. Yet, his spirit was not broken. He would later write about his time as a slave, describing how he and his fellow prisoners would quietly sing psalms. His eventual release in 1549 was likely secured through English intervention. England, under the Protestant King Edward VI, had become a safe haven for reformers. Knox travelled to England and was given a license to preach. His powerful sermons quickly gained him a following and the attention of the English court. He was even appointed as a royal chaplain. For a few years, he enjoyed a period of relative peace and influence, even contributing to the creation of the Book of Common Prayer. But this peace was shattered in 1553, when King Edward VI died. He was succeeded by his half-sister, Mary Tudor, a devout Catholic who earned the nickname Bloody Mary for her brutal persecution of Protestants. Once again, Knox was a wanted man. He fled England and made his way to Geneva, Switzerland, which was then the center of the Reformation under the leadership of the great theologian, John Calvin. In Geneva, Knox found his ideological home. He called Calvinist Geneva the most perfect school of Christ that ever was in the earth since the days of the apostles. He studied, preached to a congregation of English exiles, and refined his theological and political ideas. In 1559, the political climate in Scotland had shifted enough for Knox to finally return home. He arrived to find a country on the verge of civil war. The Protestant lords, calling themselves the Lords of the Congregation, were in open rebellion against the regent, Mary of Guise, and her French troops. Knox's return was like throwing a lit match into a powder keg. His preaching tour across Scotland ignited riots. In Perth, after one of his fiery sermons denouncing idolatry, the crowd erupted, ransacking monasteries and churches. The Scottish Reformation had turned into a full-blown revolution. Knox became the spiritual leader of the rebellion. His sermons were the battle cries. He negotiated with England for support and rallied the people with an unshakable belief that they were fighting God's fight. After a year of conflict, and with the timely death of Mary of Guise and the help of an English army, the French forces were expelled. In 1560, the Scottish Parliament met and officially abolished the authority of the Pope, outlawed the Catholic Mass, and adopted a Protestant confession of faith, largely written by Knox himself. In a stunningly short time, Scotland had officially become a Protestant nation. Knox was made the minister of the most important church in the country, St. Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. But the battle wasn't over. The following year, 1561, the widowed Mary, Queen of Scots, returned from France to claim her throne. She was young, charismatic, Catholic, and determined to rule a newly Protestant Scotland. This set the stage for one of history's most dramatic confrontations, the fiery preacher versus the Catholic Queen. Knox and Queen Mary met face to face on several occasions. These were not polite courtly discussions, they were explosive debates. Knox believed Mary's personal celebration of the Catholic Mass in her private chapel was a dangerous threat to the nation's new faith, an idolatry that would bring God's judgment upon the land. He thundered against it from his pulpit at St. Giles, just a short walk from her palace. Mary, for her part, was baffled and infuriated by this commoner who dared to challenge her royal authority and her personal faith. In their meetings, she would argue, she would charm, she would command, and at times, she would even weep in frustration. But Knox would not yield. He told her that he was bound to obey God's word, and that rulers were subject to that word just as their people were. His power struggle with Queen Mary continued until her own disastrous reign came to an end. A series of scandals, a disastrous marriage, and suspected involvement in her husband's murder led to her being forced to abdicate in 1567 and flee to England, where she was eventually imprisoned and executed. With Mary gone, the Protestant cause was secure. Knox had won. He spent his final years continuing to shape the new Scottish Church, known as the Kirk. He helped establish a democratic structure of church government, known as Presbyterianism, and pushed for a national system of education, envisioning a school in every parish. It was a vision far ahead of its time. John Knox died in November 1572. He was buried in the churchyard of St. Giles Cathedral, in the heart of the city he had helped transform. Today, the spot is marked by a simple stone set in the pavement of a parking lot, a humble end for a man who moved armies with his words. So, what is the legacy of this fiery, uncompromising Scot? He was a complex and controversial figure, no doubt. His views, especially on female rulers, are harsh to our modern ears. But it's impossible to understand modern Scotland, or the history of Protestantism, without understanding John Knox. He was a man who, driven by an ironclad faith, defied kings, queens, and popes. He believed in the power of the people and a God to shape their own destiny. He championed education and a form of church government that gave a voice to ordinary members. He was a revolutionary who, with a Bible in one hand and fire in his heart, fundamentally remade a nation. His story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the voice of one determined person can indeed be mightier than an army. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the lives of history's most impactful figures. See you next time.